The Jalisco New Generation Cartel took the fight to the next level.
March 18th, 2021. Mexican police discovered a body wrapped in plastic. A sign attached to the victim's chest read, "The traitor, El Cholo." This man had dared to establish his own gang and challenge the infamous CJNG. Here's some more times gangs messed with the wrong cartels. The Acapulco massacre. January 8th, 2011. Mexican authorities found a horrifying scene in Acapulco, a popular beach destination on the Pacific coast of Mexico. Outside a shopping center, authorities discovered 15 male bodies, 14 of which were decapitated. The handwritten signs found on the bodies were signed by El Chapo's people, making a clear reference to the Sinaloa Cartel, led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The victims were soon identified as members of the South Pacific Gang. The Sinaloa Cartel decided to take out those men because they were getting in the way of the cartel's total control over the city and drug routes. April 2010. The South Pacific first appeared as a faction of the already weakened Beltran-Leyva cartel. Then they eventually turned to operating on their own in Acapulco. In the beginning, the gang's reputation grew due to their violent and intimidating strategies, which involved recruiting a 12-year-old as a gunman and executioner. However, the gang didn't last long. They were dismantled within a year, with many members either captured or, yeah, you guessed it, killed. Why? Because they dared to challenge the infamous Sinaloa cartel, which you guys already know is one of the most ruthless on the planet.
Alguien se mata, por algo se mata algo.
Puro Sinaloa.
Since its establishment in the late 80s, the Sinaloa Cartel, led by notorious figures like El Chapo and Ismael El Mayo Zambada, didn't think twice about getting into violent clashes with other cartels and even the Mexican government. We all know the cartel operates in various regions worldwide, and despite numerous arrests and seizures by law enforcement, it continues to thrive to this day, using sophisticated smuggling techniques like the tunnels under the US-Mexican border. However, it wasn't until Guzman was captured for the third time following 2 daring prison escapes in Mexico that we truly understood the full brutality of the cartel and the sadistic nature of its leader. 2019, after 3 years of being arrested and extradited to the US, El Chapo finally went on trial.
The long road that led Chapo Guzman from the mountains of Sinaloa to the courthouse behind us today was paved with death, drugs, and destruction.
Now, one of his former bodyguards, Isaias Valdez Rios, also referred to as Memon, was brought in as a witness by the prosecution during the trial. According to the ex-bodyguard, El Chapo had a thirst for blood and would just eliminate his enemies, regardless of their status or affiliation. One of those times was detailed by Rios in court, and he said he'd personally witnessed El Chapo murder 3 members of a rival gang. According to him, the 3 individuals were initially part of the Sinaloa cartel, but later joined a rival group. And as a result, Chapo considered them traitors and chose to subject them to immense suffering before ultimately taking their lives. For several hours, the drug lord brutally beat them. Valdez Rios said, "They were completely like ragdolls. Their bones were totally broken. They couldn't move, and El Chapo was still hitting them with the branch, and his weapon too." The 3 men were later driven to an area where they could see a large bonfire. There, the jury was told that El Chapo cursed each one before shooting him in the head with his rifle. The leader then took the bodies and threw them into a bonfire, telling his men that he didn't want any bones to remain. What we just talked about is barely scratching the surface as to what this cartel is ready to do to make sure nobody gets in its way, not even the police. And the next story on this list stands as proof. Badges to riches gone wrong. Police officers are supposed to protect and serve, right? Well, not in this case. November 18th, 2023. A half a dozen local and state police officers in Tijuana hatched a plot to steal a large shipment of drugs from a warehouse where traffickers were storing it. Now, they not only broke their oath and created their own criminal gang, but they would steal from none other than the Sinaloa Cartel. And even though El Chapo is now locked up in the most secure prison in the US, the ADX Florence, it doesn't mean that the Sinaloa Cartel is any less dangerous.
No cambió para nada. El narcotráfico nunca se va a acabar. Agarraron al Chapo, pero pues ya está otro.
His three sons, known as Los Chapitos, along with his old partner, El Mayo Zambada, are still keeping the cartel's bloody reputation strong. Shortly after the theft, armed individuals fired around 30 shots at the federal prosecutor's office in Tijuana, leaving its marks on the building, and within an hour, someone shot and killed one of the municipal police officers, allegedly involved in the heist on a street in Tijuana. Apparently, the cartel knew almost immediately who had pulled off the heist, and they weren't satisfied with just one officer down. November 24th, gunmen targeted the state prosecutor's office with a barrage of gunfire. Luckily, nobody was injured. 3 days later, a state detective under investigation for theft was gunned down in his car while filling it at a gas station in Tijuana. And it seemed that the officer saw the attack coming and was able to start his car and advance a few feet before hitting a column and collapsing dead at the wheel. The attackers fled on a motorcycle. Later on, this employee at the state prosecutor's office confirmed that another two of the officers under investigation in the scandal had been shot and killed in broad daylight on the city streets. The employee said that one of these officers declined an offer for a spot in the state witness protection program in return for testifying in the case. What's more, Alberto Capella, the former head of Tijuana's police force, stated that 3 additional police officers had been killed after the heist, indicating that the cartel had launched a generalized retribution for the theft. Now, this is not all that surprising. The Sinaloa cartel has been waging war against the Mexican authorities even after Chapo's extradition. October 17, 2019, members of the Mexican National Guard briefly arrested Ovidio Guzman Lopez, one of El Chapo's sons, in Culiacan, Sinaloa, setting off several gun battles around the city. Heavily armed cartel men, numbering over 700, threatened mass civilian deaths, including an attack on an apartment complex housing the relatives of the local military personnel. Now, the attack was so brutal and intense that hours later, Ovidio was freed, with the president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, saying he supported the decision in order to prevent more bloodshed. But his freedom didn't last long. 2023, Ovidio Guzman was recaptured and extradited to the U.S., where he'll likely spend the rest of his days alongside his old man at ADX Florence. Despite this blow to the cartel, it continues to operate with the same ruthlessness as ever. Ovidio's brothers, Ivan Archibaldo Guzman Salazar and Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, remain wanted by both the U.S. and Mexican governments for countless crimes, ranging from trafficking to murder.
The Chapitos pioneered the manufacture and trafficking of the deadliest drug our country has ever faced.
Not only that, but according to a recent indictment from the U.S. Justice Department, the brothers are just as brutal as their father when it comes to dealing with their enemies. Reports reveal that they have corkscrews, electrocution methods, and even hot chiles to torture their enemies. Some victims were even fed to tigers, dead or alive. So now we see what happens when you try to mess with the cartels, even if you're a gang of cops. But what about a gang of villagers? Desperate measures. December 8, 2023. The residents of Texcatitlan, a town located southwest of Mexico City, reached a breaking point with the cartel that had been terrorizing their community. Frustrated and desperate for change, they armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find and made the bold decision to take a stand, no matter the consequences. Now, the real question is, how did the cartel respond to this unexpected uprising by a group of amateur vigilantes? Well, first, let's get into why the cartel was causing so much trouble for these villagers. Now, you see, cartels in Mexico are notorious for extorting money from any business they can get their hands on, even resorting to violence against those who refuse to pay up. One such cartel is La Familia Michoacana, which had been terrorizing the people of this village for a long time, demanding a monthly extortion fee. But the villagers decided enough was enough. December 8th. A clash erupted when the cartel announced a hike in its tax for a group of farmers in the small town. The farmers were already struggling to pay the original fee, and doubling it was simply impossible. One farmer explained,
"We had a very bad year of harvests, and we barely made enough money to pay the original extortion fee. With this increase, we basically had no choice but to die fighting or die from hunger."
The residents banded together and devised a plan to stand up to the cartel. They grabbed whatever weapon they could find and headed to meet the cartel at the local soccer field to exchange the supposedly agreed-on extortion money. The cartel was armed to the teeth, with some of them even wearing fake Mexican military uniforms. But this wouldn't deter the brave farmers who came to fight for what was rightfully theirs. Things quickly took a turn for the worse when a gunshot was fired, sparking chaos. The farmers, armed with shotguns, machetes, and sticks, fought back against the criminals. In total, 14 men had lost their lives to this violent confrontation, 4 farmers and 10 cartel members. Among the deceased was the cartel leader, known as Comandante Payaso, or Commander Clown, the alleged leader of La Familia in the region, and the one behind the rise of the extortion fee. The remaining cartel members fled the scene, and the farmers proceed to set the trucks and the bodies of the fallen on fire. In the aftermath, a villager expressed frustration, stating,
"We told the Mexican army that this was going to happen because we weren't going to pay anymore. We asked for their back and no one showed up."
The farmers had reached out to the authorities, but their pleas always fell on deaf ears. When news of their struggle went public, things quickly turned political with the upcoming presidential election in June. The current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, blamed the violence on drug consumption and neglect by past leaders. Now, he claimed the previous governments failed to take care of its young people, leading them into criminal activities. He emphasized the need to show them love and support to prevent this. On the other hand, presidential candidate Xochitl Gálvez criticized Obrador's security strategy of hugs not bullets, saying it left rural Mexicans feeling abandoned. In her statement, she argued,
"The hugs, I insist, have been for the criminals and the bullets for citizens."
This time, however, there were no bullets for the citizens, at least from the government side, and no prison time either. Despite the tension, the government decided not to press charges against the villagers involved in the clash. It was deemed as legitimate self-defense, as these farmers were protecting their land. The villagers were relieved to hear this news, but their relief quickly turned to shock and horror. December 27th, La Familia Michoacana decided to exact their revenge on these poor villagers. The cartel would storm into this village at night and abduct 14 people. The abducted adults included 3 policemen who were seized at a cartel roadblock and a wounded villager the gang snatched from a hospital soon after the clash. Jose Luis Cervantes, the head prosecutor for the state of Mexico, located west of the country's capital, Mexico City, said no ransom demand had been received. Previously, state officials had denied anyone was kidnapped and said they were simply missing. But residents of this village and a nearby hamlet said that Familia Michoacana was demanding they hand over the leaders of the uprising in exchange for the kidnapped villagers. Now the villagers refused to relent to the cartel's wishes, and the people taken were unheard of for days, until a shocking twist of events. January 16th, 2024, the police received an anonymous tip, leading them to 7 of the 14 kidnapped individuals, 3 women and 4 children. They were found behind a chapel in Zinacantepec, state of Mexico. They were unharmed, and it seemed as if though they were simply just sitting and waiting for the authorities to come and take them. Now, can we believe that the cartel had a change of heart and realized these women and kids were innocent? Well, considering what we know about cartels, this seems pretty unlikely. And as for the rest of the 7 who were kidnapped, they still haven't been found yet. The women and kids had no idea about where they were kept or what happened to them, and we can't help but wonder if they're still alive somewhere, being punished in the most brutal ways for standing against the tyranny of the cartels. The Red Wedding. January 11th, 2020. Carem Lisbeth Yepes Ortiz was walking down the aisle, filled with excitement and joy. But what she didn't know is that her special day would turn into a nightmare beyond her wildest imagination, as she was saying her vows to her groom, who happened to be a notorious drug lord known as El Calamardo. A group of armed men bursted into the church and started shooting. Carem was shot and fell to the ground, fatally wounded, while her groom was kidnapped by the attackers. Now, to make matters worse, Carem wasn't just married to a drug lord. She was also the sister of a well-known gang leader that came from a family deeply involved in drug trading. Now, their family had a long-standing feud with the CJNG, or Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Despite being one of the youngest cartels in Mexico, these guys are feared for their brutality and influence. The Mexican government ranks them as one of the most dangerous in the country, second to Sinaloa. The U.S. Department of Justice also says they're one of the top 5 most dangerous transnational criminal organizations in the world.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border.
Let's go back to 2009, where they began as a branch for the Milenio Cartel. In just a few years, they transformed into the most dangerous, fastest growing, and richest drug cartel in Mexico. The leader of this cartel is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better yet known as El Mencho, who once worked as a policeman in Jalisco. We all know his power has been paved with drugs, money, and extreme brutality. And at the beginning of his journey, he spent some time in a U.S. prison for some drug-related crimes. But after being deported to Mexico, he just rose to being one of the most wanted criminals by the U.S. government within just a few years. Now, he's accused of drug trafficking, corruption, and murder in a federal court in D.C., and there's a staggering $10 million reward for his capture.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho.
But why all the fuss for just one man? Well, El Mencho sets the tone for his cartel. His violence isn't just a means to an end. It's a sick pleasure and a twisted form of entertainment. This attitude trickles down to the rest of the cartel, influencing their tactics and ways of operation. For over a decade,
Footage emerged of that CJNG convoy. These gunmen call themselves the elite group and pledge allegiance to El Mencho.
The CJNG has spread destruction throughout Mexico with their gruesome acts, including mass killings, acid baths, decapitations, and even a horrifying practice of cannibalism used during training of new sicarios. These people committed countless atrocities over the years. One such horrific example was during the busy evening rush hour in Veracruz, where 35 bodies bound and subjected to torture were callously dumped in the streets for all to witness. Another horrifying act of terror occurred when they killed a man and his son by attaching dynamite sticks to their bodies and detonating them. They would record this gruesome scene on their phones and find amusement in it, laughing all the while. Their actions hit a new low when they attacked and killed a girl mistakenly believed to be the daughter of a rival. She wasn't. That's just a taste of how brutal the CJNG can be. Who thinks it's a good idea to mess with these people? Well, we personally don't think so, but someone else believed he could challenge him. Carem's brother, Jose Antonio Yepes Ortiz, also known as El Mato, was the leader of the Santa Rosa de Lima gang, an organization specializing in the theft of fuel from pipelines in Guanajuato. The deadly feud with the CJNG was sparked by a narcomanta, or banner, that popped up in the city of Guanajuato. It basically threatened the Mexican president to get his security forces out of the state, or else there would be more bloodshed. The banner was signed by Santa Rosa de Lima. However, El Mato quickly denied having anything to do with the banner, saying it was a setup by his rival, El Mencho. Now, El Mencho didn't really appreciate his name being tossed around, so he was determined to take down El Maro's cartel and take over their territory. The CJNG thought they could achieve that by carrying out a massacre at El Maro's sister's wedding, and it would turn out that El Mencho would escape without a trace. El Mato made a run for it, leaving his fallen sister behind. This guy went into hiding, but it didn't last long. August 2, 2020, El Mato was captured in a joint operation between Guanajuato state government and Mexico's Secretariat of Public Security. Many believed the Santa Rosa de Lima gang was finished, but a surprising turn of events proved otherwise. January 2024, a photo of this woman believed to be the current leader of Santa Rosa de Lima went viral in Mexico. She's suspected of ordering numerous massacres and attacks in Guanajuato late last year, including an armed assault on police officers that resulted in 2 deaths, a violent shootout claiming the lives of firefighters, and a massacre at a holiday party in Salvatierra that left 11 dead and 12 wounded. The shocking part, the woman is rumored to be none other than Carem Lisbeth Yepes Ortiz herself. So how could this be? Maybe she's running the gang from beyond the grave. Now, some speculate that she faked her death to evade the CJNG until she was ready to strike back. They point out that authorities never officially confirmed her death at the wedding, and so far the authorities have remained silent on the matter, leaving us in suspense. Regardless of her true identity, this woman is clearly engaged in a dangerous battle against the CJNG. The outcome could be grim, because the CJNG never forgives nor forgets, and the upcoming story proves it. From comrades to carnage. March 18, 2021, authorities in Mexico made a shocking discovery. A body tightly wrapped in black garbage bags left in a park in Guadalajara. Now, at first, the police thought it was just a mannequin because of how tightly it was wrapped in plastic, but upon closer inspection, they began to suspect that it was the body of Carlos Enrique Sanchez Martinez, a notorious gangster in Mexico. How did they know? Well, there was 2 pieces of Bristol board stabbed into the corpse with kitchen knives, claiming it was El Cholo, Sanchez Martinez's infamous nickname. But who was El Cholo? And what did he do to meet such a gruesome end? Well, El Cholo was once a loyal member of the CJNG. Some said he was even the right-hand man to El Mencho, as until he made the worst decision ever. Driven by power and greed, El Cholo broke away from the CJNG after allegedly ordering the execution of Marcos Hernandez, known as El Colombiano, the financial operator for the CJNG who had discovered El Cholo's shady dealings and reported them to El Mencho. El Cholo wasted no time in forming his own gang, the Nueva Plaza, funded by the Sinaloa Cartel, which is one of CJNG's biggest rivals. The gangs would engage in fierce battles over territories. And now here's a question for you. If you were once a member of El Mencho's deadly CJNG and saw firsthand the horrors that he and his cartel were capable of, would you ever dare to go against them? Personally, we couldn't even think about it. But El Cholo thought differently, and he paid the ultimate price for it. March 18th, 2021, a video popped up online showing a man in a red Lacoste shirt sitting in a chair, looking defeated and resigned to his fate. Behind him stood several masked men, armed and ready for what was to come. The man, later identified as El Cholo, began speaking, seemingly reading off a number of talking points. He took responsibility for various crimes around Mexico, including an attack on the U.S. consulate. He also implicated several high-ranking police officers who he claimed were working with him to take down the CJNG. One name he specifically mentioned was Omar Garcia Harfuch, a controversial cop known for his tough tactics and relentless pursuit of cartels. June 2020, Harfuch narrowly escaped a hail of bullets that seriously injured him and killed 2 of his friends. Harfuch was quick to blame the CJNG for the assassination and stated,
"Our nation must continue to confront cowardly organized crime."
Following the attack, Mexico City's Attorney General detained at least a dozen suspects who were members of the CJNG. However, El Mencho remained untouched, leaving Harfuch seeking revenge. Now, right after the video went viral, Harfuch denied all claims, posting a tweet on X saying he wouldn't pay any attention to the words of a criminal kidnapped by other criminals. It was like he knew for sure that the men behind El Cholo belonged to the CJNG. At the end of that video, El Cholo advised his supporters to stop following him and dedicate more time to their families, and nearly on the brink of tears, he finished the video by saying,
"Look how I ended."
Can you imagine having to read those words, knowing exactly what's going to happen? Shortly after the video went viral, the disfigured body wrapped in plastic was found on the park bench. He was shot in the head several times and was clearly severely tortured before the final bullet put an end to his misery. And there, pinned to his chest, was the covered in blood sign that helped authorities identify the body even before taking it to the morgue. The sign read in Spanish, "The traitor, El Cholo."